everybody. Let me tell you how blessed my wife and I are to know each one of you in this room has touched our lives in one way or another. And man, oh man, it makes today very special. We're so grateful and thankful that you're all here with us. Hang on one second. So before we get started, I have to do some special thanks to Joel Katz Music Entertainment Business Program at KSU. Keith Parisi and Danny Howes run the school, and they brought some of their amazing students. Lindsay Knowles, who's selling books over here, Brandon Robinson, Luis Chavez, and Zach Williams are videotaping this for us today so we can share it with folks that didn't make it, couldn't be here with us. The staff at Olde Bar, we really appreciate all that you're doing at Fox Brothers Barbecue. And that's it. That's my shameless plugs. And that's Barnes.
Thank you, Lanny. I used to have a podcast. I'm Barnes. How are you? This is what happens when you get Fox Brothers Barbecue. You have no money left for a host. So you troll podcasts and you find somebody to do it. But it's a pleasure to interview you about your book. I've known you you were the first person I met in Atlanta other than a 99X employee, which
I don't remember.
I remember it vividly. We went straight to American Pie and you started pouring vodka down me. It was pretty immediate.
I was probably drunk then too.
Yeah, the last time, this is an honor, the last time I sat in this position, I was interviewing David Bowie. I had no idea next it would be Lanny West.
Wow, I'm honored. I am honored.
That's a big turn. So, this book, if you've read the book, which I know a bunch of you have, I'm sure your jaw was just on the floor. I mean, from the minute, and I don't read books, believe it or not. I know you're probably shocked. That book you couldn't put down, and if you haven't finished it already yet, you're gonna be blown away. But the first question that I had in my mind was, why? Why would you write a book? Why would you wanna encapsulate all of this craziness?
Well, in my whole life, I try to keep things funny and lighthearted, and try not to shine anything on me. I like people to laugh, and so I would tell these crazy stories about my time in the music business. And many of you in here that knew me back in those days, these stories are kind of unbelievable, and so I would tell these stories in settings, and everybody would go, "Man, you should write a book." And so in really looking at it, I could write a book and there'd be very interesting stories, but there would be 4 X's on the front of the book and it would be in a brown paper bag behind the counter if I told those stories. So I wanted to tell those stories, but there needed to be a payoff, and I couldn't figure out what the payoff was until I got out of managing musicians after 20 years, and it's the most thankless job on the planet, without any doubt. And I was trying to discover what I was going to do with my life, and I ended up going to school and for 2 years and got a degree in nutrition, life coaching, and I got out of management, and I went into even a crazier end of things to help touring musicians be healthy while they were on tour. Nobody wants to be healthy, so I graduated from the school, and I said, well, now there could be a payoff. This might mean something to somebody. I could tell these stories, and then there's a payoff of health and so forth. So the initial title of the book was going to be Cocaine to Kale, and I said, well, that would be pretty cool, you know. And I started thinking about the stories, and then not too long after that, I don't know exactly how long, I came to faith in Christ, and that was a very dynamic time in my life. And when that happened, I said, well, now I could write a second book. And this one would be Kale to Christ. And so I wanted to tell the story because many of you out here and I'm nervous, by the way, and I don't know why. I know you all love me.
It's Jimmy Barron in the front row. It's probably really terrifying.
So I really feel like that many of us in this room have horrible life. None of us have a perfect life under any circumstance. We all have trouble and problems in our lives, and we should tell those stories. We shouldn't be embarrassed about it, and as long as it can benefit someone else. So that's really where this thing led, and I wanted to tell the story, and especially after coming to faith in Christ, I wanted to be able to help other people in our industry and people that are struggling with their path, to maybe I could be an influence. And so all I wanted out of this whole thing is if I didn't care if any books sold or not. My wife makes money and I spend it, so she paid for the book. And by the way, I did not let her read this book until it was printed. And there's 30% of this book that she knew nothing about. So my whole thing that I feel from God is that if one person, just one, comes to faith in Christ or comes back to faith in Christ or strengthens their faith in Christ, then I will have accomplished what he's asked me to do. And I think we're way beyond that. So that's a long story, but that's why we...
Yeah, well, let's rewind a little bit to the cocaine and the sex and the drinking. And, we've kind of glossed over a lot. If you've known Lanny, which I'm pretty sure most of this room has, you were probably thinking when you were reading the book, what page number did I meet Lanny? Because reading it and knowing you for so long, it really, it made a lot of sense to me. A lot of the pieces just kind of started falling into place. Your childhood, the way you grew up, and I could relate to a lot of that, by the way. And a lot of people in this room will relate to his radio career and going to radio functions and having people throwing money and cocaine on the table. And, all those years, because that stuff, believe it or not, happens. And you sit here today where some people might have died 3 times. And there's a couple of times in the book where your life was threatened. Talk about the first time you felt like you were going to be killed.
That I was going to...
Yeah.
That I was going to...
Which gun to the head story do you want to tell? But that's terrifying in itself. But when you have all of the alcohol going on and the cocaine and you start mixing in those type of people, stuff happens, right?
Yeah. Well, let's see. Now you're not talking about the times that I was going to...
Pick one. There's a couple of things in there that were terrifying.
Well, my childhood was terrible, and I had no idea who my birth father was, and I only found out who he was. I think I was 15. I started drinking at age 13, and by 15 I was an alcoholic. And somewhere in there, my mother lashed out. She wasn't a very loving human being. And she lashed out at me and slapped me across the mouth and chipped my tooth and told me that I was exactly like my father. And I go, what do you mean exactly like my father? It's like these 2 guys that you were married to. And he was an abuser and a womanizer. And she had one picture of him. And so that's all I ever knew of my birth father.
Did she look at you as just basically a carbon copy of him?
I guess so. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but I knew nothing about him other than that. And based on the 2 men that she had married after that, I go, there's no reason for me to find out who this guy is. My mother had already married, 2 abusive men, 2 alcoholics, and one of which tried to shoot us. And so the second guy that she married, and me not having a father, I tried my best to get acceptance. He had 2 boys, my mother had 2 boys, and then they had a son. And I tried everything. My stepbrother was a 5-letter guy, played all the sports, and the girls loved him. And the guy, he was a drunk, and he wet the bed until he was 22 years old. And I'm going, why does my stepfather reach out to him? Here I am. I play every brass instrument in the high school band, the piano, and recitals, and the guy would never show up to any of my events. and he just wasn't there for us. And I decided I was going to get married to my high school sweetheart, and I was like 18, 19 years old or something.
Marriage number one, those keeping track.
And so it was a tumultuous time, and I came to this realization that I couldn't do that. I was not going to go to school, and so I was crying one night. My brother was in the next bed, and he said, "You want me to go get Mom?" And I said, "Yeah." So she comes up, and I'm crying, and I'm telling her, "Look, I'm not going to go through with this marriage thing. I know that it's not what George wants me to do, and I really want to make amends. I want to tell him." She said, "Well, let's go downstairs and tell him." Now, my stepfather was a doctor, and so he's on calls all the time. And so this was at night, and we go downstairs and we wake him up, and so I explained to him. I kind of poured my heart out to the guy, and look, I want to go to school where you want me to go to school. I'm not going to go through with marrying this guy. And he sat up on the edge of the bed, and he says, "I don't give a fuck what you do. I don't care where you go. And I am not your money man, so don't bother me." And just something snapped in me at that moment. And I went upstairs, and I had a single shot 410 shotgun, and I put a shell in it, and I came downstairs with the intention of shooting him. And had it not been for my mother, and now looking back at that time in my life, I know that, and all these things that happened to me or that I did, God stopped it, or I'd be in prison, I'm sure, right now.
So that was the first big moment.
Yeah.
The first big one. Did your mom ever tell you that she loves you? I mean, what was it like growing up with her? Did you feel like you were a burden at that time, or did you look back and think you were just a burden to her, and that's where this kind of all started blossoming?
She was not a loving human being. Although I say that, she did. I think she did in marrying these guys. Although she liked being in the social limelight, and so she married guys that had money. I truly believe she was trying to make sure that we were provided for, but she was not a loving human being. There was no hugs. There was no encouragement.
What were birthdays like? Did they just come and go, or did they like?
Sometimes we would have birthday parties, but nothing big. Christmas was okay, but it was based around my older stepbrother. You know, if he happened to be out drunk and not home for Christmas, we would postpone doing things. So it's kind of based around him. And I think that's really where I got off on a really bad foot. I had no good positive influence. I didn't really know what love was, and so I set out on a mission to try to figure out what that was.
But you kept seeking for acceptance from these different men who would be the head of your family, so to speak,
right,
at that time. And that had to just fuel you and the anger inside of you.
I didn't have any kind of guidance.
Because the first guy telling you, "I'm not your money man, just get away from me."
Like, well, then and Bass, who was another stepfather before George, he was an attorney, but he was an alcoholic, and his family had a lot of money. And he almost killed us one night, drunk, driving the car, swerving, going, and he got mad at my mother, and he pulled a gun out as we get into the driveway, and I truly believe he was going to shoot her in a drunken rage. And she got us out of the car and got us into the house, and we dragged the telephone into you guys remember dial-up phones? Dragged it into the bedroom and locked the door as he's beating on the door, and we called a good friend of hers that came and got us. We had to climb out of the bedroom window to escape this. So that was the kind of surroundings that I had. I didn't have anybody that goes, you know, Lanny, we ought to go to church. We ought to learn something. There was not a Bible in my house. We went to church for show. It was a fashion show. And the first time we went to church, moving to this little town of Cuthbert, Georgia, my whole family goes, we were dressed to the nines, and we go and sit 3 sections of pews, and we sat in the fourth row in this first section of pews, and the ushers came and moved us because the Hughley Scott Ford family sat there every Sunday. And I go, really, at that age, I was going, this is what this is all about, the church thing. And I really have no desire to have any part of it.
Do you have one happy memory as a child? I mean, seriously, the things that you talk about in the book, and I know there are more beyond the book, just the ones that made the book, was there any era in that, say, teen era or even preteen that you can remember a happy moment?
Yeah, there was, we lived in this little town called Cuthbert, Georgia, and we lived in a house that was built in 18-something. It was used as a hospital during the Civil War. And the Methodist church was across the street, and directly over here was a lady, elderly woman named Annette Suarez. And I would go over there and spend most of my time helping her and being around her and listening to stories that she would tell. So that was pleasurable, and playing my instruments in the band was fun. But no real exciting times that were with the family at all.
You said when you discovered alcohol. When did you discover sex? Because that seems like a major theme in the book that was always placed at very high value. Like that was almost going to be an escape for you from this horrible life.
15.
Because so alcohol and sex all within a couple of years.
Absolutely.
Was it that did you think that those departures from reality, so to speak, at that age were going to sustain to get you like away from that feeling of being with these people?
Well, I think at the time I was seeking, looking for love, and I equated love with an emotion and contact, and so that whole thing of having sex and being with a girl, it was like I was getting love and acceptance, and so it just started snowballing from there, and that's and I was equating love to an emotion, and love is not an emotion; it's an action. And so it started, and it just never stopped.
Right, and that trend kept going. I mean, then you kind of ease out of those teen years, and I know we're jumping kind of around in the book, but hearing you say some of these things, they trigger questions. But as you get out of the family life and you start getting out on your own, what were you holding as a high value then? Was it still the liquor? When did you start easing into drugs? Because all of a sudden, now you're getting into a really dangerous cycle. And you get out of what city at this time? When you left home, where were you?
Let's say I ran away from home when I was 17, and I was in West Point, Georgia.
And you came where?
To Atlanta.
You came to Atlanta?
Yeah, lived in a house with 15 other people. I had never smoked pot until then. That was a crazy story. So we go over all these people, and we're smoking pot at somebody's apartment and drinking. And I started freaking out, and I made everybody leave this person's apartment. I ran them out because I was freaking out.
That's the Lanny I know. Hey, get out of here right now.
So to make money, we sold the Great Speckled Bird. Some of you know, Rick Diamond knows what a Great Speckled Bird is. The predecessor to Creative Loafing. It was a very liberal magazine, but we all sold it at Underground Atlanta for 50 cents, and we got to keep a quarter. And then TBS had just kicked off. And so one of my friends that had run away with me, we would go in, and they did this kind of Dick Clark thing on Saturdays, a dance show, and I can't remember the name of it, but they paid us $20, and we would dance on that show, kind of like a Dick Clark thing. So that's how I made money.
What year was this, by the way, when you got to Atlanta?
Are you kidding me? You think I can remember that?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just...
So I was born in 52, so go wherever it falls into that.
Like 73?
Oh, no. You mean when I ran away from home?
No, yeah, when did you first get to Atlanta?
When I was 16. 17.
Okay, when you were 16.
Yeah.
Wow.
Somewhere in that area. Yeah.
Lanny West.
I'm not great at math.
Why the name Lanny West? Because that's not your real name. Surprise.
Anybody here know that that's not my real name other than my wife?
Was that just another thing to separate?
It was an opportunity to escape. But so when I started working in radio, I was in high school, and I started working at a little radio station in Lanett, Alabama. And man, I was so wound up about music, and I felt like I became pretty good at picking hits as the years progressed. But I started a little show on Saturdays, and then I ended up, the night show was a daytime radio station. And the guy, so my birth name is Boyd Anthony Downard. Downard is my birth father's name. And the general manager of this radio station, now here I am, already a nerd and picked on and spit on and getting my ass whipped in school. And so he came up with a name. He wanted to call me Boppin' Boyd for my radio name. And I go, you are really seriously lost your mind. I wouldn't make it out of the PE class alive. And so I started doing research and listening to DJs. And so I started working at this YMCA camp in Wetumpka, Alabama. Oddly enough, I ended up working at this radio station years later. So there was a guy named Monty Parker that was on the air, and I listened to him, and we got to go into Montgomery and go visit the radio station. And the first thing I asked him, I said, Monty, I listen to your show at the camp all the time. How did you come up with your radio name? And he said, well, Parker is my real last name, but Monty is short for Montgomery. And so I said, I got it. So the ID of the radio station was WRLD, Lanett, Alabama, West Point, Georgia. So Lanny is from Lanett, West is from West Point. And so I became Lanny West. I became a new person, and I got tired of signing Boyd on checks and stuff. So when I was 21, I had my name legally changed, which broke my mother's heart. But it was in an effort not to be called Boppin' Boyd, and number two, to escape that life and how I grew up, you know. And it didn't really help. It didn't help me start over anything. It maybe made it worse.
Leslie is wife number what?
6.
I wish she would get on this mic because I have some questions for her, but I know it's not going to happen. So 5 marriages over X amount of years, and then Leslie Fram. And the questions would be like, you saw the roadmap, and you still signed up. When you met Leslie, was it the routine program? Meaning you'd been through all of these women, and you'd been divorced, and then you meet Leslie, and you thought, oh, this is just another, at the start, like, was it she's just another one of these, she's next?
Do you want me to tell you about how we first met? Because there was 5 years.
Yes, I thought in the book that was the meeting.
All right, okay. So my thing was that in seeking love and acceptance with these women, I just felt like if you had sex with them, you married them, and then it's all false. It's false, and I know now that Satan put that in front of me, and I bit the bait. But I would if you marry them, then you can have sex anytime you want to have sex, and that really doesn't work that way, does it, folks? And so I would get bored with them, and I would start cheating on them pretty quickly.
That was the trigger, just boredom.
Yeah.
You're like, peace out,
and then
next.
You're gone, and anyway. So I'm working for a company that does bars, restaurants, and some of you went to the clubs here in Atlanta when we had them. And the company owned a hotel in Mobile, and so I was in charge of the entertainment and all that stuff down there, and the advertising. And they did a show on Friday night called Club 97, and where they played music live, dance music live from the club. And I did not like the DJ they had, and I, being an expert in the club business and radio, I didn't like the music format. And so I asked my sales rep to set me up a meeting with the program director. Now, here's an odd story. I'll go back just a little bit. I applied for the program director's job at this radio station, and it was me and Leslie. She got the job. I didn't. But anyway, so my sales rep set me up with a meeting with the program director who I didn't know. So we get to the meeting, and in the conference room is Bernie Dittman, who owned the radio station, the national sales manager, local sales manager, my sales rep, the music director, no program director. But we sat there doing idle chit-chat for about 20 minutes. And 20 minutes into this meeting, this bitch walks in and sits down at the chair in front of me, right? And she reached her hand out and she said, "Nice to meet you." She said, "I understand that you want to talk to me about the show that we're doing and that you want to make some changes." And I said, "Sure." And I explained to her exactly what my point in this whole thing was. And she Leslie's been this way her whole life, and you guys all know how Leslie handles these kind of situations. She just kind of nodded her head and she said, "Look, I'm not really interested in making any changes in this show. And if it doesn't meet with your marketing strategy, let me know. We have 3 other clubs that want this show badly. Great to meet you. I have another meeting to go to."
Wow.
This thing lasted 5 minutes, this meeting. I'm going, I just got smoked. I've never been smoked by a woman in my entire life. This chick, and then it was 5 years later before we met and reconnected. And I was in LA working at Hitmakers Magazine, and I was in charge of doing these conference calls. And it was a sneaky way to figure out what radio stations were playing so we could sell the information to the record companies. And I saw that Leslie was moving to Atlanta. I know her. And so I called and asked if she'd be on one of the calls. And we never even talked about that first meeting. And she was gracious and said, "I would love to be on that call." And so anyway, so that kind of opened the door. And then we ran into each other at a Bobby Poe convention. Bobby Poe convention in San Francisco. And that's a whole nother story. So,
did you notice a change in yourself immediately when you guys connected? Was this the beginning of a new Lanny?
Yes. Indeed.
In what way? Because you hadn't been faithful to anyone yet.
So I go to LA because I wanted to get back in the music business, out of the club business.
And that's a great place to get a fresh start.
I'm rocking. I'm living. I had just gotten divorced for the 5th time. Almost killed that wife. That's the story of that wife sleeping with my son.
Oh man, okay, we haven't even gotten to that.
So anyway, I'm Hollywood. I have gone off the deep end. I've got a ponytail going on. I'm wearing all black denim.
Where were those pictures on the slideshow?
They're not. But I was the guy that owned the magazine. I was living in one of his houses, his 5-bedroom ranch house, swimming pool, movie theater. I was hot stuff. I mean, it was like crazy. So Leslie and I are talking. She's on the conference calls, and I go to this Bobby Poe convention, and I got off one of the elevators, and I'm walking, and I hear somebody goes, "Lanny West," and I turned around, and it was Leslie. Leslie was hanging out with Lee Chestnut, who was down there. So we started talking, and just immediately, and when I say immediately, I mean immediately, there was an intelligence about this person that I had never been around before from a female side of things. And not that she didn't blow my socks off and that she wasn't amazingly attractive, but she was the first woman that the first thing on my mind getting in the sack didn't even start planning on how are you going to make this happen. We spent the whole weekend together going to events. Jellyfish was the first show we went to. And I got to have a conversation with somebody that was truly in depth and was entertaining and enjoying. And there wasn't an agenda on her part. And so the last night we stayed up in the bar with some friends of hers, which I don't know where those friends are, just having conversation. And I sent her flowers the next day. And anyway, so that's how we reconnected.
Well, you brought it up, so I need to back up for a second. What is it like catching your son having sex with your wife?
Well, I didn't necessarily catch him in the act. So
No, well, you know what I mean.
So-
that made me just drop the book. I was like, what?
So my son, by my first marriage, my high school sweetheart, she and I had a horrible relationship. He was born, and we got a divorce pretty quickly. So I really played no part in his life or upbringing. And then Kathy and I got married and had 3 children. And I get this phone call from this kid that tells me he's my son. I don't know how he got my phone number. And his name's Jason, and I know the name and so forth. Hey, y'all, come on in. Go find a seat. Come find a seat. Anyway, so I drive from Atlanta, and I agreed to meet with him. He'd been kicked out. His mother kicked him out, my ex-wife, and he was having a hard time. My heart said, okay, he's your son. You got to go. So I go meet him, and we have a conversation. And I just felt this really heart pain, and I go, man, you abandoned this kid, and you need to do something to help fix it, right? So I called Kathy, and I said, I think he needs to be with a family. I think he really needs to be a part of our lives. So she agreed. So he comes up, and I cleared the basement out, made his bedroom.
And this is wife number 5, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he was hanging with the kids and all that. So I started noticing something very bizarre. We took a family vacation to Florida, and we had this Volkswagen van, and I'm driving. And I'm looking, and Jason is in the back seat of the van with his head in her lap, and she's stroking his hair and all this. And I'm going, now, I could understand that if it was one of the smaller children and stuff. This kid's 19 years old. I kind of blew it off. Anyway, so we come back, and Kathy and I are having some intimate moments one night, and I noticed this glow under the dresser. And you know those things that you plug in, you get it at Radio Shack, you plug it into the wall, and you can communicate from room to room, kind of an intercom.
Yeah.
He had set one up underneath the dresser so he could listen to what's going on.
Wow.
So anyway, so then we decided we're going to move to LA. They were all supposed to come with us. And I don't know, I had this weird feeling. My son, Justin, was talking about how they were always scared when it thundered and lightning, and they would always get in bed with mom. And he said, you know, Jason is scared of the thunder and lightning too. He gets in bed with mom. And I said, oh, this doesn't sound right. So we're getting ready to move to LA, and I needed to get new tires on this Volkswagen thing. We were going to have it shipped in a moving van. And so Kathy and Jason went to take the car, and they took Christopher, which was my little toddler. And I went down to look through his drawers to see if there was any drugs in there and stuff, just being a snoopy dad. And so I find 3 pair of her underwear and 3 letters that they had been communicating back and forth with, and how I don't know how you can stay with this guy. He's an ass, and I love you, and I just, if you've ever had a blackout anger moment, you'll know what I'm talking about. But I totally blacked out, and I drove to where they were, and folks, I am totally ashamed of how I behaved in this thing, especially to my children. But it was not a pretty scene, and I caught them, and he ran. She came back to the house, and anyway, it was not a pretty scene.
And did you ever hear from him again?
I did. Actually, his wife called me several years ago and said, hey, this is Christy. I'm Jason's wife, and he's just unloaded his heart and told me what happened.
I can't even imagine what you said.
Well, at the time, I wasn't very nice about it. I said, Christy, thank you for calling me, but you need to tell Jason that if he ever contacts me or tries to contact me, I will find him and I'll kill him. And so...
Wow.
And I won't get into this story now, but I have now discovered that his son, my grandson, has bought my book and has contacted me.
Are you ever afraid that
move along.
Are you ever afraid some kid's gonna walk in and be like, "Hey, Dad"?
It's possible.
Depending on where you're doing
It's possible.
the book party.
Yeah, we're not doing one of these events in Montgomery.
Yeah.
I'm just going to tell you.
I mean, there's so much to cover. I don't know how we are on time, but we're in the Fram years now. And so that's when maybe a lot of you met Lanny for the first time. During the 90s, which Lanny was that still going on? Was the anger was still festering, or had you squelched some of that with your pairing with Leslie? Like, had you started becoming a new person?
Well, I think I still had some of the anger thing. Leslie but I kind of did away with. I stopped doing cocaine when I met her. I stopped that, but I didn't stop drinking. I mean, I was truly a functioning alcoholic, and I could do things. I mean, I could do things. The bands I managed that played here, those stairs that are outside, I could load out drunk going down those steps. So that didn't change, but she never put any pressure on me about it. The cocaine use stopped.
So that was never a conversation. It was just, you just decided, okay, she's not going to put up.
She didn't have to say anything ever.
Yeah.
It's the relationship that we had that just, blossomed. And I got scolded several times. I embarrassed her several times. But anyway, but a lot of it did calm down. I never have been unfaithful to her whatsoever. She's my soulmate, and took me a hot minute to find her, or God to put her in my life. But we have an amazing relationship.
When did you find God? Because that was a big piece that was not, I don't remember about you in the 90s or 2000s.
I mean, that would be 4 years ago, 5 years ago.
What was it that, how did you evolve to that moment?
I think when we're doing things that, when we have habits and we have addictions, we get tired of them. Some people, unfortunately, take their lives because they can't figure out how to get out of it. And so several years ago, my brother-in-law and Leslie's sister are Christians. They are amazing human beings, but I was so uncomfortable being around them. I don't want to hear any Jesus talk, and I'm not going to church. And they never put any kind of pressure there. But after I got out of school and started finding the health thing, the deal is there's 4 food groups. And those 4 food groups must be working clicking along at a 7 or 8 before you can move on to the nutritional side of things to heal yourself. And those are relationship, career, spirituality, and physical activity. So I rated myself in all those areas. So career, I had a stinky career. I just couldn't make it happen. So I would give myself a 6. Relationship-wise, I gave myself a 9, and I didn't give myself a 10 because of me. It would have been a 10 because of Leslie. Spirituality, 0. Physical activity, a 10. So I said, if I'm going to be fair about this, I need to figure out who Lanny is, all my past, and find out what's the spirituality part of my life is. So based on the experience that I had in church and stuff as a child, I put Jesus and God on the back burner. And I went and studied all the isms that there are to try to figure that out. Anything but going to the Bible. And I didn't like to read the Bible because the print's too small. And now I know that being a natural man, God wasn't going to allow me to read the Bible or even understand it. So this Christmas, we go and I started asking Don a few questions. Okay, if I'm going to do this, I have to give God a chance to come into my life. We had purchased this 40-acre farm. I'm spending a lot of time on the farm. I start asking Don questions. First, the Christmas gift he gives me is 2 boxes. It's a gun and a Bible, and he said every Southern guy needs a gun and a Bible. So we drive back to Atlanta, and I put the Bible in the closet in the box and went to the shooting range. But as things started going, I started asking some questions to Don. And Don is, I call him my John the Baptist, right? The guy's read the Bible 100 times. Whatever you want to talk about, he can talk about. And he turned me on to this pastor in Mobile, Brother Fred. And so in asking these questions, now my favorite thing to say always was that Jesus was a great man. He had a great PR firm, this guy, right? And that's why we know him today. And the Bible is a great history book. And so that's kind of how I left it. And so Don tells me, while you guys are driving back to Nashville, I want you to listen to this sermon from Brother Fred. And I agreed. Because by this time, I had made an agreement to read the Bible. So I got a phone app, and I'm reading every night. It took me a year and 2 months, and I still didn't understand a word in it, except some of the verses that we all know growing up. So we're listening to this sermon, and Brother Fred's sermon, he starts talking about history, and he talks about the fact that the Bible is a great history book. And I told Leslie, I said, see, I told you, it's a history book. And then the next thing he says, yes, his story. And I got chills, and I go, okay. Now I'm starting to see the picture now, right? So I spent a lot of time talking to Don. I spent a lot of time with Brother Fred going down to Mobile. And every time we went down, he would always manipulate his schedule so he could preach on that Sunday when we were there. And he played a big part in helping me figure out what the farm was going to be for, and a very big encourager for me to write this book. And so, I'm spending time at the farm, and I'm talking to God. I'm out by myself. It's dark, and I'm bearing my soul. And so I asked Don. I said, "So Don, I need to know what should I expect to happen? Am I going to do cartwheels down the Kmart aisle or something, or fall into the floor? And what should I expect here?" And he just said, "Just listen." Well, now I had been listening all my life to music and so forth, so music played a big part in my life. So I started trying to listen, be still and know that I am God. And so one night, one of my favorite things to do is cooking. So did Scott Davenport walk in the door? So Scott Davenport is one of my favorite chefs in the entire world, and so I think he got me a chef jacket. So I love cooking with a chef jacket on, barefoot, and I was drinking wine at the time, and I always listen to Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, crank it up, listen to 60s music, and so we had this couple coming over for dinner, a musician that was coming over, and I'm cooking, and for some bizarre reason, I decided I needed to listen to contemporary Christian music. Now I know who Amy Grant is, but I don't know anybody else. So I go over to my phone, and I put in contemporary Christian music, and it comes up with these playlists. And so I get this compilation, and I know nobody that's on this disc at all. So I put it on, crank it up, go back to cooking. First thing I noticed is that contemporary Christian music is produced way better than rock, any other genre of music. So I'm listening, and so I'm now about 6 or 7 songs in. I'm kind of digging what's going on, and this song comes on. Now talk about just listen, right? So this song comes on, and it is as if the Holy Spirit and just threw me to the floor. When I tell you I collapsed on the floor, I started crying. I couldn't move. I was crying so hard I couldn't even see, and I'm listening to this song. And I listened, and then I finally was able to get up, and I listened to this song like 15 more times. And then I went in and immediately wrote Don an email on what had happened on that evening. And so anyway, so the band is called 10th Avenue North, and the song is called Control. And the key line in this, I mean, it's so amazing, and it was me. The whole song is me. But then in there it says that, oh God, you don't need me, but oh how you want me. And that was the trigger point for me. that the father that I never knew, right, my birth father, and the father that wanted to know me but that I shunned, finally captured me. And that's basically how it happened.
What a story. My suggestion for the book title was From Fram to Farm. Because those are the two things that have had like the biggest, and he didn't take it, obviously. Those seem to be the two biggest things that had like this massive impact leading up to your journey with Christ. And so what now? Is it just like, have you found all you're looking for? You're just done?
No, I'm not done. He's not done with me yet. I'm trying to figure out what the farm is for, because I know that what our journey is, that we're supposed to go out and share the gospel. I'm not, and I'm not a teacher. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a street preacher. But how do I do that? And share that. But in order to get there, I needed to know not about Christ. I needed to know of Christ. So I spend every day studying. Through great discernment, I found the pastor. I found a teacher preacher that I study with every day, and then I found a preacher teacher who I listen to, who's in Murfreesboro. And so through help from Brother Fred, who, by the way, unfortunately passed away last year from COVID, we talked about the farm. And so I'm not a farmer. As a matter of fact, my neighbors call me the local citiot, because I bush hog a lot of the property, but I have a 0-turn mower, and I am out in the pasture because it has to look like a golf course, right? So I'm not a farmer, but what am I going to do with this farm? And I now know that it's harvesting souls. And so Brother Fred talked to me about, you really should do a men's ministry, because men have a hard time expressing themselves, and especially in front of women and family. And they need an opportunity, a place where they can put it all together. So Zach Williams is an amazing contemporary Christian artist, and he has a song called "To the Table." So I kind of captured that, put it all on the table. So the ministry is called "Bring It All to the Table," and we've done our first one, and our next one is going to be in March. And only 11 men are invited, and no one that is invited knows anyone else that's coming to this event or to this weekend. And it really is an amazing thing. It doesn't matter whether you believe in Christ or not. You come, if you need to bare your soul, this is where you can come and do that.
I suggest you do that on days when Leslie doesn't have 15 Zoom calls, because I know you have to log her in to each of those and get it up and running.
Well,
how do you have time to do? I mean, seriously, between all the farm and the animals, and now you're going to launch. Is this what is officially next? This retreat?
Yeah. So we just built out a camping area. So we have four custom sidewall tents. They're like 14 by 16.
Sorry, I don't know what you speak of, this camping.
But one of them is going to be the chapel, and then the others, and then there'll be some primitive camping that'll be there. So we really want this to flow into not only a men's ministry, but we want to do it with couples, and then young musicians that are struggling. They need guidance in all kinds of ways. And Leslie and I try to mentor a lot of young musicians every day and help them out. But I truly believe this is where this is all going. And we'll see,
It's been an incredible journey, and watching. It's been an honor to interview you, because I've known you all these years, and not those early years, but to watch this evolution just unfold. So anyone have any questions for Lanny?
Don't make them hard.
Don't be scared. We can't really see anything,
right.
But
we won't force you to ask any.
Yeah, we won't force you. You can ask him in private. But thank you for letting me interview you.
Thank each
quite
and
a
every
story.
one of you, and I hope that wherever you are in your path with Christ, that you're led there or you're strengthened, because it has done wonders for me, and that's where we are. So thank you all for coming.